Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Edric Show. I am your host, Edric Jerome. This is the place for intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button and ring that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I post content each and every week. My guest is Matt Ferrence, author of the new book, I Hate It Here. Please vote for me. Essays on Rural Political Decay. The timely collection of essays provides an in-depth perspective on his run as a Democrat for state office in a deeply red district in rural Pennsylvania and explores how American political narratives refuse to recognize the existence and value of non-conservative rural Americans. Matt is also a musician, a poet, and he teaches creative writing at Allegheny College in Medville, Pennsylvania. Matt, welcome to the show.
Hey, yeah, thanks for having me.
Oh, you're welcome. You're welcome. And again, just a very, very fascinating topic. So let's get into it.
Yeah.
First question is with a book, what motivated you to want to give voice to the rural progressive Democrats who live, work, and vote in overwhelmingly conservative Republican districts?
Yeah, there's a direct answer. I'll start with the direct answer, then I'll widen the lens. So, some number of years ago, I think it was 2017 or 18, the person who has been in the office that I ran for said in a conversation with other Republican colleagues that he wanted to stop giving higher ed funding to students who major in poetry or other pre-Walmart majors. Those are his words. And then people heard about that. They're a little bit annoyed. And he apologized to Walmart and continued, and has continued in the years since to argue that letting students study poetry is a waste of time. Just recently, budget battle in Pennsylvania, he was apoplectic that Pennsylvania was going to establish their first poet laureate. And so, as a professor of creative writing, and I want to clarify, I'm not actually a poet. I'm not that good at words. But I'm a prose writer primarily, but great respect for the poets and what they do. So, as first of all, as a professor of creative writing in a rural place, who's from a rural place, I was insulted in both direct and conceptual ways about that statement. And then that wider lens is that I grew up in a county about 2 hours south of where I live now, which is the same kind of rural. That was former coal country where I grew up. Up here, it was manufacturing country, different parts of northern Appalachia. And I grew up as a band geek, I say with love, as a theater kid, but also as a member of 4-H, grew up on a farm, all sorts of values that are both consistent with what people expect about rural places and what they don't think are there. And that's why I wanted to run, was there's big problems in these post-industrial parts of rural America, and they're not helped when we try to limit the horizons of students. So that's kind of a long answer, both the narrow and the wide view.
When you decided to run, did you, and I don't want to be let me see if I can, I don't want this to come across the wrong way, but did you really
Yeah.
think you could win? Or was it more about having a conversation with like-minded voters about the issues
Yeah.
that you particularly cared about?
Yeah, when I started, I will admit to what probably was naivete. I thought I could win. And I believed, and there's a certain part of me that still at least wants to believe this, that running a campaign of ideas in a place where there have been just empty rhetoric ideas would be a way to break through the noise of partisan politics. And we know, well, political scientists know that voters are actually swayed on local issues, not national issues. So I actually thought, oh, I could make a dent. In running, what I came to see was it wasn't possible. And at some point in the campaign, it was very obvious to me that there was no way I was going to break through. And so I recognized that the real value in running in a can't win district, or can't win right now district, is that you can push ideas. You don't have to be a politician. I don't think any politician should be a politician. That doesn't make quite sense, but you know what I mean. But you can run on what you actually believe in and try to represent the people who aren't represented in those conversations, and also help others hear it and realize, oh, wait a minute, maybe the emptiness that we've been getting forever isn't all there is. And I really took that to heart as a candidate, that my job was to talk. My job was to try to explain how there are different ways to approach these political problems and how they're related to stories that have been told about who we are that aren't always true.
I noticed on your website you were endorsed by several organized labor organizations.
Yeah.
But the question I have is, um, can you expound on the fact that organized labor, they don't seem to have much influence in these areas, these rural red counties? Why do you think that's the case? And do you think that organized labor has an opportunity to play a bigger role, especially given what organized labor stands for, dignity of work and fair pay and all of those things, which you would think in an area like rural America, those would
Yeah.
resonate.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And I think organized labor should have a bigger voice. Now, in a place like both Meadville and Indiana County, Pennsylvania is where I grew up, organized labor doesn't have as large of a footprint as it used to have because the industries are gone. And so in former coal country, the UMWA doesn't have much influence because there aren't that many UMWA members anymore. And what mines are left are often wildcat mines and non-union. And here, there is a union at one of our larger manufacturers, which is they make hand tools. But strangely, it's except for the fact that they're a union, very conservative voters. And so partly the hope side of it, maybe we're seeing a lot of labor action in places where we haven't seen labor before. It's a lot of working people are recognizing they're not getting a fair shake. And so it's possible that in rural America, where people aren't getting a fair shake either, some of these new versions of labor might be able to have an influence. But partly they're just not at the table because the industries are gone.
One of the concepts you write about, which again I found so interesting, is you write about, quote, mediocre white dude conservatism. Can you expound on that and the negative impact that that has on rural politics?
Yeah, right. And I'll freely admit, in many ways, I'm a mediocre white dude. But like, so right now we've got the hateful rhetoric happening with Kamala Harris, right, as a DEI candidate, and I love some of the pushback that's happened. That is, if we want to talk about people not having to earn their way into positions, it is that mediocre white dude candidate who can just sign up for whatever empty rhetoric. I'm just going to talk about the GOP here in my place. What the GOP says that doesn't help around here, they can just say, I'm part of that. And then they're going to get the votes. And their mediocrity isn't even part of the conversation. As soon as someone opposes them, they start becoming a questionable interloper to that. It's white supremacy in the academic way that I've studied it as a professor as well, that where we don't think about the constructions of racial control, and that you're invisible when you're a mediocre white dude. That's who's supposed to be in office. And when anybody challenges that, it suddenly is, well, they must not have earned the right to do that. They're not one of us. And that harms us. I mean, that harms us spiritually as much as anything else. But from a perspective of politics and policy, we just get, especially at the state level, a lot of not very deep thinkers winning elections without being pushed at all, who go to Harrisburg, our state capital, and offer that emptiness in the way they write or don't write legislation for laws. And so we're just trapped in what we have.
Quick aside, are you familiar with ALEC, the Association for Legislative?
Yeah.
And the reason I bring that up is because you mentioned going to the legislature and just pushing laws. And what ALEC does, for those of you who may not know, for probably 30 years now, have offered these cookie cutter legislative, very conservative laws across a broad number of states. And they literally change the state and the date and they sign it. Given that what we know now about ALEC, and which is, the next step obviously is Project 2025, which we will get into it another day. What's the impact on the lack of non-intellectualism, I'll say that, on some of these laws, and that the fact that they're predetermined and it's cookie cutter?
Yeah, well, and I'm glad you bring up Alec because that literally is what happens in the case of the incumbent I ran against. I actually signed up for the Alec newsletter when I was a candidate because it was useful to know, and I could see it happening. They would put something forward, and this I wasn't even getting like the secret insider info yet, and then you would see it spit out of the mouth of the person I lost to and out of the mouths of the entire GOP in Pennsylvania and across the country. So you see these coordinated efforts by a think tank. And I mean, and Alec is thinking. I think Alec, unfortunately, may be intellectual. They know what they're doing,
True.
but there's a bunch of people who aren't thinking. And I'm not defending Alec.
No, no, I
Back
understand.
second, right? But there's a bunch of people who aren't thinking or don't want to think. Right, they're making, in our case in Pennsylvania, 100 grand a year, which is um, about triple the household median income in our county. To be a legislator who doesn't have to do anything but show up for photo ops and then pump out these coordinated ALEC uh, efforts to do the stuff they're trying to do, which is the worst of it. And Project 2025 is a new version of that. And so this is where like so much cognitive dissonance happens when you live in a place, well, any place or place like this, where people want to talk about being free thinkers. They don't trust politicians, which is not a bad way to operate in your life. But then they're voting for the politicians who are doing exactly what they claim to hate. And I think a lot of voters probably don't know Alec exists, first of all. And second of all, don't know how lockstep what they're getting out of their conservative legislatures and conservative representatives are with Alec's aims. This might be naive of me again, but I feel like if that was some of the effort that was put out more, if we could help people understand that, you would start to lose some of the support for mediocre white dudes in empty politics. But then the realistic part two recognizes that people aren't voting for issues. They always say they are, but they're voting for a story, and the issue and story are often passing each other like ships in the night.
Well said. You also you don't just label or level your criticism at conservatives. You also take Democrats to task as well. And one
Yeah.
of the I guess concepts again that just stuck out to me is you really take Democratic moderates to task. And in fact, I think you labeled them toxic moderation. Um, can you talk about moderate Democrats, toxic moderation? As it relates to the perceptions of rural American voters and why that's so devastating to this population.
Yeah, and I think some of my largest pockets of anger for moderation happen with rural moderates, in that when you're running in an election where, so the registration split where I am is about 65-35, which is about where the vote was. If people bother to run as a Democrat, a lot are more likely to run as a moderate with the idea that, well, we can get some of the Republicans to vote for us. And that is not going to happen. Because if I'm a conservative voter, I'm going to vote for the real thing, not the conservative light that is the moderate Democrat. So there's this abdication of opportunity when you basically say, well, they have a lot of fine points. I'm a little different, especially when you're not getting fine points, what we have right now, we have hateful points happening, then moderation just allows that chokehold of extreme conservatism to continue to hijack rural America and hijack the Republican Party itself. And so when a person is moderate, that's one thing, that's fine. People have different positions on the spectrum of politics. But when they're choosing moderation to try to not make waves, when waves need to be made, I don't understand that. There's been a lot of thinkers smarter than me that have talked about the consequences of that when you're trying to battle injustice, when you're trying to battle hatred. Um, I can remember a couple of instances when I was running and I would go after something, and I'm not that aggressive of a person, but when I would go after it in a pointed or heated way, I would get an email or someone would pull me aside and say, well, you got to be careful that you don't turn people off by seeming whatever. And that always rub me the wrong way. I'm like, well, I'm calling out something that you think is bad and I think is bad. Why should I moderate that message to pretend that something hateful isn't hateful?
Yeah, yeah, agreed. I was fascinated by your account of a speech by now Senator John Fetterman
Yeah.
at the Crawford County Democratic Committee Spring Breakfast back in 2022. Why did you find that speech to be problematic, and what was the political significance of that speech for rural progressive Democrats?
Yeah. Yeah. I think it told me a lot. And this was very early in the campaign. It was slightly before the primary. There wasn't another Democrat on the primary ballot. So I was the presumptive nominee. And in attendance at our spring breakfast, I was there. And then a woman who was running for the U.S. House was there also, who had no opponent. So she was the presumptive nominee as well. Again, running against Mike Kelly, a right winger in Butler, Pennsylvania, is where he's from. And so John Fetterman showed up, very tall, wearing his Carhartt, and his speech to this breakfast. And backing up a second, the idea of the breakfast is we're here as the county party to generate momentum heading into the primaries for the election. And it's a team sport thing, rah rah, go team. But Fetterman stood up and said, you can't, I'm paraphrasing a little bit, but you can't win as a Democrat in a county like Crawford. So your job, everybody in the room, the voters, is to go out and get more votes for Joe Biden. He didn't introduce himself to me. I don't know if he talked to Christie or not. Then he left, and he was headed up to Erie County, where I actually also was going because the district I was running in was in both counties. Erie County, Pennsylvania is a bellwether county in the state and in the country when it's very close. And up there, Fetterman's message to the Democratic Party was, we have to elect every candidate on this ballot. We have to be blue top to bottom. I don't disagree, but I was there too as a candidate on that ballot. So in Erie County, I mattered. In Crawford County, I was just the fodder for top of the ballot elections. And then I saw that even more once Joe Biden was the nominee. The state Democratic Party called, and they wanted me to convert all of my volunteers into making phone calls for the Biden campaign and work primarily for Biden, maybe for me a little bit. And then I found out, volunteers for the state party in my district weren't supposed to mention my race. They were supposed to focus on the top of ticket. So what I figured out was, A, Fetterman was not wrong. And that's also painful, right? From a political strategy perspective, he's absolutely right. But from a let's change the lives of people, let's actually try to alter politics in a different direction, it's an example of everything that's wrong with partisan politics, is that the only places where a Democrat is going to get attention are a wipeout district for Democrats and those few competitive districts in the country. So they're giving up on rural America in most cases because they're not winnable, which means they're never going to become winnable. That seems like a bit of a conundrum for the future.
I just thought you captured it beautifully, and what it taught me was that it's important to have people in the room who can balance those nuances, who can really understand and appreciate, and it's not just I guess so partisan that they don't see what's really going on. And I
Yeah.
applaud you for being able to articulate that, because it's sorely needed right now as well. Um, What will it take, given your experience and what you went through,
Yeah.
what will it take for Democrats to increase their influence on rural American voters and increase political support? Is it even possible?
I mean, I think it has to be a long-term investment. And part of me thinks it's not going to happen from politics and politicians. It's going to have to happen from rural progressive individuals continuing to be willing to put themselves out there, which is not always comfortable, often is quite uncomfortable, and talk to their neighbors and get at those issues in ways where you can break down the suspicion. What I was astonished at how instantaneously I turned into a communist when I was on the ballot, right? It could literally be my next door neighbor not my next door neighbor actually, but it could be, who would in the political setting see me as absolutely the worst thing that could ever happen to America, but chat with me over a beer about mowing the lawn, right? So that's part of that problem. But from the political side, and we're seeing a little bit of this now, there's a few organizations doing this work, is to continue to try in rural places, to not give up and to actually invest the money, because most voters are so tired of politics, understandably, that they're only paying attention around the election. And so you need to have those messages coming out around elections from losers like me to help everyone understand what choices are actually out there. And that's not an easy solution. It's an expensive solution. And I understand the worry that if you don't spend money over here where you know you can win, and you spend it over here where you can't, then you'll lose everywhere. But somehow we've got to find a way to do both, or we're going to continue to have those maps that we see where, you know, there's big blocks of red and big blocks of blue in urban spaces. And that's, of course, one of the things I talk about. 12,000 people voted for me. I got wiped out. 20,000 plus voted for the other guy. But that means 12,000 voters don't matter in a rural space because it's a red space. So we can't allow that to continue to happen if we want to have change.
And that even trickles to like municipal elections, like, you know,
Yeah.
cities and councilmen. I don't know if you guys have council there or and school
Yeah.
boards. You see that where it's, to your point, it's almost impossible to even have a dialogue or a conversation, because the minute you say something that someone disagrees with, you're a communist or you're an X or you're a Y. And so in that vein, how did you deal personally with the name calling and even some of the threats that you received while you were running?
Yeah, I mean, for the most part, I just tried to ignore it. And every now and then, to no benefit, I would mix it up a little bit, because mostly these are keyboard warriors who are attacking you. But there's not much you can do about it. So real, or I've lost the word, person to person, that sort of conversation, you have a chance kind of to break down. And maybe we'll talk about the Farm Bureau tour at some point here.
Yeah, go for it.
Well, so this was an example that's both like the potential and the difficulty. So there was a legislative farm tour where the Farm Bureau of our county, and there's still a lot of agriculture here, mostly dairy farms, does a tour for the elected officials to show them a farm. And then the Farm Bureau Executive Board presents to the legislators what they would like to see, what they need help with. And I finagled an invitation because there's a restoration seed company here in town that actually the family that owns it is pretty right wing, but we have similar values. They have restoration seed. He cares about prairie grasses and for profit, but that's okay. And so he invited me to come to this breakfast, and so I came. And I was having a great conversation with a dairy farmer before everything got going, and we were sharing stories about 4-H and different things. And then she asked why I was there, and I told her and who I was running against, and she laughed and said, "Oh well, we love him. Good luck." And so it shut down immediately. So we could have the conversation, but the shutdown was still happening. Then after the tour, the Farm Bureau presented their dreams, their wish list. And the two big ones on that wish list were rural broadband expansion and price controls, because they weren't making enough on milk, which instantaneously, those are two Democratic issues. Right? And so the presentation this board is making is very much like what the Grange, if we think about that as the old Grange as a collection of farmers would be, for a bunch of progressives who want to pool their resources together for help. And the response from the elected officials was effectively, yeah, good luck with that. And so again, opportunity and shutdown. And so those are the places where you can see the possibility of, hey, let's talk about how broadband is necessary for access to market for farmers, how COVID was happening at this point in time, how if you have a good internet connection, your kids could still be going to school and you could do your farm work. And for small family farms, the next generation can stay on the farm and remote work at the same time that they're working the farm. All of these are benefits for rural America that get washed away in the retail politics of red versus blue. So again, I cling to hope. There's an opening there, but that shutdown is so fast, and that's what we have to keep working to disrupt in some way.
We have a couple minutes left, and so I guess my last question for you is, given everything you've gone through and your experiences, and again, congratulations on it's a great book, it's a great read. Um,
Thanks.
are you still involved politically in some capacity? Do you have hope? Do you have optimism? Are you pessimistic? I mean, where do you see the logical next phase? Because it's almost like we're at a critical point of if things don't change, and maybe even by this election cycle, they never will.
Yeah, I agree. And so I'm feeling cautiously optimistic right now. So the energy shift
Yeah.
with Kamala Harris coming on as we still have to say presumptive nominee, but as the Democratic nominee, that vibe shift is real, and there's an energy, and we're starting to see something happen. Now, in rural spaces, right, there's going to be stuff, but I think the issues can allow that opening. And a lot of rural progressives and even rural moderates are so rightfully worried about what a second Trump presidency could mean that they're motivated to get out there and talk. So for me, I'm still involved sort of in this way as a writer. That's my main gig as a writer and a teacher. And I'm actually tonight. I have a call with West Virginia Democrats. There's another writer on the call, and several actors and other people in the art space to do this open Zoom to talk about what can we do about the images of Appalachia, particularly with J.D. Vance as the GOP VP. And the idea that this story, and this is where I think storytelling is so important, the story of J.D. Vance as representative of rural America, as representative of Appalachia, will give him a leg up and give Trump a leg up in rural spaces in the election. And what this calls about, and what I write about, not just in this book, but everywhere, is how Appalachia isn't what people think it is. It's a lot bigger than what people think, both literally and conceptually. And that's how we can start poking holes in those restrictive narratives that make it way too easy for people to get the lever pulled for terrible politics. I'm hopeful that that does make a difference.
Well, Matt, I want to thank you for taking the time to chat with me today. Again, your book is fascinating. You provide a brand new perspective, again, from somebody like me here on the West Coast, who, yeah, I fall into those perceptions of Appalachia as well. But you provided some context and nuance to a population that deserves to have that. And, there may be opportunities there to cull more like-minded individuals because, again, a lot of the issues that connect people shouldn't be labeled in a political contest. They're just basic human needs, education, clean water, clean air. I mean, you even spoke to that, I think, in your book
Yeah.
about conservatism and the land use and preserving the land and why that's so important, not just for folks, on the coast, but also in those rural areas where the land, and using the land productively is so important. And you can't do that if you don't have clean water, and so forth and
Yeah.
so on. Yeah. Yeah. All right. Well, Matt Ferrence, author of the new book, I Hate It Here. Please vote for me. Essays on Rural Political Decay. Again, I want to thank you for coming on the Edu Show. If people want a copy of the book or they want more information about you, where can they go?
So your local bookshop is a great place to start. Ask about the book. They can order it for you, or you can go to wvupress.org and you can order it online directly from the publisher as well.
It will change your perspective on electoral politics, and I'm a little bit more keen now to some of the when people talk rural America, it's like, well, wait a minute, who exactly are you talking about?
Hey,
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, Matt, again, thank you for taking time to come on the Edric Show.
thanks very much, Edric.
All right, this has been another edition of the Edric Show. I am your host, Edric Jerome, as promised. intelligent conversation with interesting people. Go ahead and hit that subscribe button, ring that notification bell, and you'll get notified when I post content each and every week. I want to thank you for tuning in, and I will catch you on the next episode.